When a lamb is born, they're born essentially with no immune system. It takes a while for that to develop, so how they achieve immune status for the first 2 to 3 months of life is from the colostrum. The mother will provide the antibodies, so when the lamb takes that first drink of colostrum, there's a lot of antibodies in it for a very limited amount of time. After birth, they can absorb these antibodies, and that will provide the protection for generally 2 to 3 months.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch, and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice, and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode, we'll join me Kieran O'Mahony, Area Veterinary Manager at Zoetis, to discuss Clostridial vaccination in sheep. We have an in-depth discussion on vaccination strategies and optimum timing for both ewes and lambs. We also cover the key practical considerations, including proper vaccine storage and administration, and why these are crucial steps for effectiveness. Additionally, we address the supply challenges encountered this year and impact on vaccination programs. Kieran begins by outlining the challenges posed by Clostridial disease.
Clostridial disease, I suppose I would say it's an umbrella term. That's actually covering a whole host of different bacteria, of Clostridial bacteria, and a whole host of different diseases. The one thing that they usually do all have in common is that they end up in the same place, that being death. So it's almost 100% fatality for animals affected by Clostridial disease. And Clostridia, so going back to the basics, Clostridia are bacteria. They're gram-positive anaerobic bacteria, but they are ubiquitous. So that's to say they're found everywhere. They're found in soil, deep in the soil. They're found in vegetation, rotting vegetation, but they're also found in animals, healthy animals. You can find Clostridium perfringens found in the small intestine of healthy animals, and that's normal. So even though it's ubiquitous, it's not the presence of the bacteria per se that causes issues. It's when these bacteria are exposed to certain circumstances that allows them to start replicating rapidly and producing toxins. And these toxins, even in small doses, they're the things that are fatal to animals.
We often see here, like it can happen right throughout the year, but we often see different periods where there's higher risk or there's different stressors on the animals. That can elicit a response in it.
Exactly, yeah. So it's for each of the different species of Clostridium, there's different sets of environments that can elicit that rapid replication, and with that, different times of the year. So take, for instance, pulpy kidney disease. That's consistently what the regional veterinary laboratories are reporting as the highest incidence in sheep. That's year on year. It seems to be the biggest one. That's also known as overeating disease. So what the conditions that causes this disease is usually, and the funny thing is, you usually see this disease in often the best lamb in the flock. It's when there's dietary change or the lambs are being moved to a more lush pasture, or there's introduction of rapidly fermentable carbohydrates into the diet, that this can affect the stomach. That allows for rapid replication of the Clostridium perfringens type D, and that starts producing this toxin. So it produces a lot of toxin in the gastrointestinal tract before these toxins are absorbed into the blood. So that set of circumstances is unique for pulpy kidney disease. Hence, there's usually a peak in pulpy kidney disease kind of in the summertime. Some years you'd see it in May, June time. Last year, I think it peaked back in August time. So that's usually when the veterinary laboratories will see this disease.
Like in terms of a condition, and as you stated there, it nearly always ends up as a fatal disease. We have vaccines available for it. We have vaccines that are very, very effective for it. Relative to other conditions we try to cover, like the broad range that we will experience in sheep in Ireland are covered under different vaccines.
They are, yeah. And we call them multivalent vaccines. They're really robust, so they provide really good protection against Clostridial disease. The vaccine that we do in Zoetis is called Covexin 10 because it protects against 10 different strains of Clostridial bacteria. So that's encompassing all the major disease-causing ones in sheep in Ireland. And, Clostridial disease, it continues to be a major cause of mortality in sheep, despite the availability of these vaccines that the regional veterinary laboratories, they're reporting The the incidence of it, it's accounts for over 10% of submissions of mortality in sheep every year, basically. And that's usually, they would say, it relates back to incomplete or absence of vaccination programs. And so I think it's really important to highlight the importance of one, vaccination, but also the doing it correctly. So adhering to the protocol and doing it the way you're meant to.
And we might just discuss that more detail. I think you highlighted a challenge there that oftentimes it's not until we see losses that we actually consider vaccinating. In terms of the actual process, though, Kieran, and that has a big impact on the efficacy of the vaccine, it's a two-stage initial program. You might explain to me why that is the case and how you go about doing that correctly.
Exactly, Kieran. That's really important. To get effective protection against it, the primary dose, it's always a two shot process. So we'll take Covexin 10 for as our example. That's a 1 ml dose. So you're coming in with 1 ml subcutaneously to the sheep. But a single shot will get an amount of protection. It'll produce some antibodies, but then there's a window, 4 to 6 weeks later, when you come in with a second shot. If you produce a second shot in that time frame, you get this huge ramp up of antibody production in the sheep. And that's what provides the clinical protection. So if you're only doing a single shot, it'll be very limited amount of protection. But if you're in that good window, 4 to 6 weeks later, that's when you get the huge ramp up of antibody production, and that's what protects the animal. So very important for all producers to be aware of that, and that to be aware that single shots won't protect the flock.
So in essence, that single shots allow the body to recognize the disease, start to produce antibodies, and it's the second one where we get that big booster and a large production of antibodies that covers them for a 12-month period, really.
That's it, exactly, yeah. So that's the primary course, 2 shots. From then on, the body will have built up these antibodies. It will recognize the diseases, and it's only a single shot booster from then on. So a single shot of 1 ml is what we would advise for, especially for the whole flock, essentially. But when we're discussing ewes, we do advise to give the booster shot of 1 ml between 2 and 8 weeks pre-lambing. So depending on the lambing profile and how compact it is, would be advising to go in about a month pre-lambing. That's kind of usually the magic spot where you'll be able to get most of your ewes boosted within that 2 to 8 week window.
I think you're touching on something very important. Obviously, the Clostridial vaccine protects the animal itself that's given it, but we also depend on that passive immunity to protect young lambs. Kieran, just maybe explain how that works and what are some of the common pitfalls that can occur there?
That's it. Really important point. And the reason that we're doing it within that time frame, 2 to 8 weeks pre-lambing, is that'll cause a big ramp up in production of antibodies, but those antibodies are transferred into the colostrum of the ewe. So when a lamb is born, they're born essentially with no immune system. It takes a while for that to develop. So how they achieve immune status for the first 2 to 3 months of life is from the colostrum. So the mother will provide the antibodies. So when the lamb takes that first drink of colostrum, there's a lot of antibodies in it for a very limited amount of time. So for a short period of time after birth, they can absorb these antibodies, and that will provide the protection for generally 2 to 3 months. That's the importance of the window in terms of getting your booster in the right time frame. But we must also pay huge attention to colostrum management. So one, that we have good quality colostrum, having ewes in good body condition. We know that's a vital for colostrum quality, but making sure the lambs are getting colostrum in sufficient amounts and quickly enough after birth. So that is the importance of colostrum management cannot be overstated. If you're vaccinating the ewes, but the lambs aren't getting the colostrum, you're not giving them any protection. So that's why it is so important.
It could be a common pitfall in multiple births, particularly triplets, where maybe one lamb only receives artificial colostrum. You always have to remember he's not getting that passive transfer of antibodies.
Exactly. Yeah, that really they need They need some of their own mother's colostrum or colostrum from another ewe in the flock to get these antibodies. Look, the artificial ones are okay, but they're not going to provide the specific immunity to these diseases that the natural stuff will. So the way I would generally look at it is the artificial stuff is okay to supplement, but really all lambs, they need to be getting some of the real colostrum from the ewe. So ideally their own mother, if not, some other one from the flock, or if you have a reserve of frozen colostrum is the next best thing. They are all going to be more potent than the artificial colostrums. So that's where the focus needs to be.
That's what pooling can come in handy. Look, we might just stay with the lambs when we are discussing them. Where a flock maybe has a significant challenge, or maybe where they didn't get the ewes done, how soon can they go in with the lambs? And it's the same protocol again, Kieran?
Yeah, so I said that comes back a bit to the protection that's provided by the colostral antibodies, the ones that they're getting from the mother. We know that they provide protection depending on the colostrum or the Clostridial species for generally between 8 and 12 weeks. So if you're actually going vaccinate the lambs in that time frame, the antibody might actually inactivate the vaccine itself. So that's why, and they mightn't develop an adequate response to the vaccine. So we would advise for lambs who have had good colostral protection to maybe come in at from 6 weeks on, depending on the spread of ages in the group. But if they're doing it when the youngest lambs are 4 to 6 weeks, the oldest ones will be hopefully 12 or under. That'll be a good window where coming in with the primary shot across the board with the lambs and coming in with the second shot then 4 to 6 weeks later, and then they'll have the full immunity developed for themselves, the active immunity.
So that's the scenario where the ewes have been on that program done, and we have good cluster management. And again, that's not to compete with the maternal antibodies. In the scenario, Kieran, where the ewes aren't done, could you go in earlier?
You could do a bit earlier again because they won't have the antibodies there fighting the vaccine itself either. So in that situation, it would be possible to come in that bit earlier, maybe 2 to 3 weeks for them lambs. But again, for me, the goal should be getting adequate passive transfer first, and because there's going to be a range of Clostridial diseases that can affect really young lambs, lamb dysentery and these things. So to get protection for that time frame, your best bet is going to be from the passive antibody transfer from the colostrum.
I think that's a very important point. That first 3 to 4 weeks is a vital stage. If we talk a little bit about some of the practicalities of this, because we talk about where vaccines can break down, where different products don't work, oftentimes is how we actually go about administering, storing the products. This can all have an impact. So maybe we start with the basics, like storage of your Clostridial vaccine from when you purchase it to when you use it.
Yeah, and this isn't the exciting part of vaccinating or diseases, but its importance can't be overstated. That a lot of vaccine breakdowns or disease breakdowns, they can come back to inadequate administration and storage and these things. So important to touch on that. Firstly, it's a vaccine, so it needs to be kept cold. There's the temperature window is between 2 and 8 degrees, so it needs to be kept in the fridge. That's kept in the fridge from the place you're buying it. In the cold chain needs to be respected when you're transferring it from where it's bought to your home place, and kept in a fridge as well. We don't want it getting too cold, so you don't want to put it directly onto a block of ice because freezing it can damage it also. So that 2 to 8 is the magic window, and keeping it in the fridge at home. That's really important, and making sure that fridge is working. We've just had major electricity outages, especially up the west there lately. A lot of fridges were out of action for a while. That could have rendered a vaccine not working afterwards. So need to be aware of that and to address those issues. Yeah.
So certainly not leaving it in the window of the Jeep is not the place for it.
No.
In terms of usage, and this is the other question we often get, once you break on that bottle to use it, Kieran, how long do you have?
8 hours, which might sound very short, but basically, once it's open, use it up. Opening it and storing it and coming back later, I would not recommend it. We couldn't stand over that the vaccine will be working effectively after that. So you've got an 8-hour window once it's been broached. And
Okay.
even on the broaching front, it's really important to be clean in this. Personally, I'm a big fan of the automatic injectors. I think they're one, ease of administration. They make it easier. They're really accurate, delivering the 1 ml dose accurately every time. But also, you're only broaching that bottle once when you're putting it on first, rather than having to broach the cap every time you want to draw out a single mil. So that's really important. If someone is not using an automatic injector, if they're going with syringes, I'd recommend them to use separate needles for what they're drawing out of the bottle and what they're injecting into the animal. There is the potential for introducing bacteria from a needle into the bottle if they're using the same needle. So I'd call that the two needle approach. Just trying to keep hygiene really, really important because anytime you're injecting a number of animals, there's potential for spreading bacteria, causing injection site reactions, abscesses, and these things. So that's something we really need to be mindful of. Yeah.
No, look, we really should move towards the vaccination gun. I think if you have it once, you'll have it there. And again, look, ensuring that's been cleaned down and maintained right is important as well. Um, in terms of the site of injection, and look, sometimes we can see abscesses occurring afterwards. Now, is there any kind of couple of recommendations you have around that for best practice?
Yeah. So the advice for site of vaccination, 1 ml dose subcutaneously on the side of the neck. So the side of the neck is really where we should be putting this. It's actually a relatively clean site. Part the wool there, tent the skin out, and get it in under the skin. So um, doing it in a clean site is really important. A lot of people certain farmers they like to do it in the kind of the armpit area. There's a bit of skin there where there's no wool on it, not actually the cleanest site. You can see a lot of sweat and waxy material there, a lot of bacteria in that area. So better off avoiding there. And on the neck is actually a cleaner site, less chance of injection site reactions. The other thing I would draw attention towards is getting it in the right space. So it's not intramuscular. It's not in the skin. It's between the two. It's under the skin. So by pulling out the skin, you're creating that space where we put the vaccine. That especially down in my part of the world, where we'd be TB testing calves. If they would see it on certain farms, if you're testing them any amount of time after the vaccine was administered incorrectly, say if the farmer was doing it intramuscularly, you get these enormous reactions in the muscle, big swellings, and they can last for months afterwards. So we need to be aware of this and delivering the vaccine to the right site as clean as possible. Even days when it's very wet, mightn't be ideal for going at vaccinating because that can increase the likelihood of introducing bacteria into the site and getting these. You can get these nasty abscesses if you're introducing bacteria by a needle under the skin. The other thing I'd probably say is it's good to have a fresh needle. I'd change it every kind of 15 to 20 animals if possible. One, keep things clean, but it's also, if you have a new needle, it's a lot easier to give the injection. If there's any bit of blunting on the needle, you're causing pain to the animal. It's a lot harder to get it in. So keeping a fresh needle is important. If the needle is dropped or the vaccine gun falls on the ground or gets anyway dirty, discard that needle immediately. That's going to be a major risk factor for introducing bacteria into the wounds. Yeah,
No, I think it's important. But then again, adding to a compromised efficacy of it is just undermining the whole process.
exactly. Yeah.
Kieran, we have seen some supply issues in the market right across the sector this year. Would you maybe give some indications? What are some of the challenges there in obtaining the product?
Look, that's something we're acutely aware of. It has been challenging over the last year in terms of supply. Something that we're working hard with our suppliers to ensure that we are at capacity and we're doing our most to get that supply to our farmers right throughout the year. It's been impacting other manufacturers across the board equally, but we are working it. What I would say is these Clostridial vaccines, they're generally multivalent vaccines. So they have several strains, or Clostridial 10 has 10 strains included in it. That makes them quite complicated to produce, but it's also more likely to suffer the effects of an antigen shortage. So if there's any one of those 10 that's in short supply, the vaccine can't be produced. So that is challenging, but having said that, I'm firmly behind the fact that we need to go for these multivalent vaccines, that Clostridial disease it can be any one of the Clostridial species. They can be acting together. So the broader range of protection we're giving is going to be a more robust protection.
In terms of farmers, like one of the things they could possibly do is just ensuring that they have checked for supply in time.
Exactly. Speaking to your local vet, he might need to put you on a waiting list perhaps, or make your need for it known to your vet anyway. That would be important, and to discuss with your local vet. There are some other points I would highlight if somebody can't get access to the multivalent vaccine. In Zoetis, we also have a monovalent vaccine for blackleg only. So blackleg, not as important in the sheep as it is in cattle. It is the number one presentation in cattle. So possibly the blackleg vaccine for cattle producers might be sufficient. But there's also other management factors we can do to limit the amount of Clostridial disease we see. I suppose think of black disease, especially up around the northwest is where we see the most of black disease. Liver fluke play a major role in that. So it's the acute phases of liver fluke, usually in the tail end of the year, that they cause liver damage. Where if the liver is damaged by those fluke and there's Clostridia in there, those Clostridia can start replicating rapidly, and that's what will kill the animals. So if we can control the fluke, it will limit the chances of getting black disease. Also, other bits like if a farmer has had experience of certain fields being more prone to Clostridial disease, avoiding these at high-risk periods of the year, or if there's been digging or excavating in certain areas of the farm, maybe avoid them, because that can draw up these spores, these Clostridial spores. The spores are the dormant form of the bacteria, that they can be deep dwelling in soil for years. They can stay alive for many, many years in that dormant form, but if they're brought up to the surface, they can become infective again. So maybe avoiding some areas like that, and then I suppose always paying attention to reducing injuries and trauma, even clean needles and all of that as well is really important, yeah.
It really just highlights the need to look at the overall system and take everything into account when you're looking at any condition in sheep or cattle.
It is. They are almost every disease is multifactorial. So if we can control it from as many sides as possible, is always going to be the way to go. But yeah, the vaccination is going to be a critical part of it for Clostridial disease.
Kieran, really appreciate you coming on this morning. Look, it's very timely, it's very relevant at the moment, and hopefully it's useful to our listeners. Thanks again.
Great to be here. Thanks a million, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. An interesting insight into the impact of Clostridial disease and some of the practical things we need to consider in our vaccination programme. I thank Kieran again for coming on with us. That's it for me for Update Summer Sheep programme. Keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.